Most parents never consider tragedy striking their family during a vacation. Or at least they didn't until 2007, when the news of Madeleine McCann's disappearance made international headlines. 3-year-old Maddy vanished from the apartment her parents were renting in Praia Da Luz, Portugal. This was arguably the most publicized missing persons case in European history. The media storm surrounding the disappearance would ruin lives, and 14 years later, we still have no answers. Welcome to Fact and Suspicion. I'm your host Dan, here with my co-host Ben, and tonight we are discussing the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. So, Ben, have you ever heard this one referred to as the European or the British Maura Murray case?
I can't say I have. I mean, I've heard it compared to Jean Bonnet quite a few times. I mean, for obvious reasons, but
Yeah, I think it's probably more similar to Jean Bonnet as well. But I've heard some people call it, like the European Maura Murray. And I'm guessing just because, Maura Murray was so big, at least, as far as like in the internet age where people were trying to figure it out and everything.
right.
And then this was obviously the most publicized case that I know of in Europe, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, that family had so many camera crews just following them around everywhere. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, they're basically being trailed by paparazzi, if I remember correctly.
I know that a lot of people have mixed feelings about their guilt, and we'll get into it about what happened and the suspects and everything. But I thought we'd just let's go ahead and start with the story now. Maddy was born on the 12th of May in 2003. Her parents had actually been trying for 5 years to have a child, unsuccessfully. And they turned to IVF. And then Kate got pregnant and they had Maddy. And then about a year after Maddy was born, they ended up having twins just naturally.
Oh, non in vitro?
Yeah, non in vitro.
Well, that's luck.
Which, yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, you say luck, but now, they were trying to get one. Now they've got 3, right? But, so they got their hands full. And Maddy was, I mean, you've seen the picture. She's a really cute, really sweet little girl. She had this toy called a cuddle cat that she went everywhere with. She wouldn't put this thing down. She also had a very distinctive eye condition called coloboma.
Yeah, I think we've all seen it. I mean, you can't miss it if you see a picture of her. It looks like her iris is bleeding, or pupil rather.
Yeah. It's what it is it's a condition where generally in the womb the eye doesn't entirely form properly, and it can be different parts of the eye that are affected by this. But in Madeleine's case, it was part of the iris that didn't form didn't form properly. So it did look like she had sort of a keyhole shaped pupil, maybe.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the pupil. I corrected myself a minute ago. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it looks like the pupil's bigger, but it's just because the iris wasn't completely formed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But now moving on with the story, Kate and Jerry took their family on a vacation to Praia Da Luz, Portugal. It's in a region of Portugal called the Algarve, which sort of a beach region. They took Maddy, who was 3, and then the 2-year-old twins, Emily and Sean. And they stay at a resort called the Ocean Club. And this is it's not just sort of a resort with hotel rooms. It's sort of these big apartment complexes where you can go into your own apartment through the outside of the building. It's not like you go in through an interior hallway or anything. Right?
Gotcha.
Now, the McCanns have some friends vacationing with them. And they would go to a tapas restaurant every night. And that's why these friends are known as the Tapas 7.
Oh, okay.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah, that they called them that, but the names of them were Jane Tanner and Russell O'Brien. They were a couple. And then you have David and Fiona Payne, Diane Webster, and Matthew and Rachel Oldfield. And like I said, they would go to this tapas restaurant every night. And when they did, they would leave their children asleep in their rooms. and every 20 or 30 minutes, someone would get up and go check on the kids.
Wait, no babysitter?
No babysitter.
That seems
and
incredibly irresponsible.
I mean, I would agree. And obviously in hindsight, it was absolutely terrible. But yeah, I couldn't do that myself. And it's going to sound worse here when I'm explaining this, but the resort actually did have a service to watch kids at night. It's called the night creche. Which at first, when I first heard that they called it a creche, I was really confused because I've always, heard of a creche as being like a manger scene, like a nativity scene.
Right.
Right. But like in Europe, creche is actually referred to as like a daycare, something like a place where they watch children.
Okay.
Right. So that's why I was confused when I read it was a night creche, but that's what it was. It was like they would watch kids at night while their parents go out. But, the McCanns and their friends didn't want to use this service.
Why not?
I'm not sure exactly why, but like some people have said that they didn't want to get their kids like off of a sleep schedule. So like they're used to going to bed early. So they, instead of going to bed, they'd, take them to this night creche and they'd stay there till like 11 or midnight. And they take them back home and they'd be all woke up and all that kind of stuff. They get them off schedule.
I mean, when you compare a sleep schedule to a kid waking up with their parent not there, or, I mean, something much, much worse, which eventually happens. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't really make sense to me.
And I agree. I don't think I would have used the night creche either, but I probably wouldn't have I probably would have, stayed in the room with my kids.
Yeah.
Right. Now that's me. And obviously we study like missing persons cases all the time. Right. So we're going to be paranoid about that kind of thing more than other people, but I would not have left my children there. Now I don't want to cast judgment on them because they did this too much. I mean, because obviously their friends did it as well. And none of them thought there was a problem with it. But I can't, here's the thing though, right? You've got a 3-year-old and 2 2-year-olds, right?
Right.
And you just said, like, if they wake up, I mean, I've got a 4-year-old and sometimes she wakes up when I'm like, just down the hallway and she flips out.
Yeah.
Right. So I can imagine these kids waking up and no one's even in the apartment at all. And, you've got the 3-year-old is the one in charge out there, I guess. Like that's going to be a terrible situation.
How
right?
far away were they from the rooms?
Okay. Now they were only about 50 yards away. And the restaurant, like they especially requested a table, toward the edge of it's an outside place, right?
Mm-hmm.
They requested a table like toward the very edge of it. So they're in eye shot of the apartment. Now, I don't know. I've heard a lot of conflicting reports, and I've seen different reports in different articles where one says they could see the back door of the apartment, and others say they could not see from their table. I don't know, but they were definitely within eye shot of the building. It was only about 50 yards away across sort of a courtyard, but the door could have been obscured by some trees and shrubbery, or they could have been able to see it. I don't know for sure. Right. But that back door on the patio is the one they left unlocked so that they said they didn't want to go in and out lock the front door and go in and out the front door because using the keys and unlocking the door would wake the kids up. And they wanted their friends to be able to go in that back door as well to check on them.
So they didn't lock the doors because they thought the keys might wake the kids up?
Yes.
I mean, their priorities just seem completely out of whack.
I would agree, but I'm going to say that if they could see that back door from the table they were sitting at, that may change some things in my mind as far as how irresponsible leaving that back door open would be, unlocked rather would be, right?
Maybe a little. It still makes me very uncomfortable to think of leaving kids alone like that.
Well, yeah, still, obviously I wouldn't leave them alone because I'd be worried they'd wake up, but I mean, it's almost like me sitting out in my backyard and, my daughter's in the house asleep because you're not that far away, right?
I suppose you could probably rationalize it like that, but I mean, I can see why they would think that.
Right. You're still in a foreign country though, right?
Yeah. And it's not just that it's a foreign country; it's a place that you're unfamiliar with, right?
Yes. Yeah. Though, and from what I learned about the case, though, Praia Da Luz, they did not have things like this happen, though. They didn't really have children go missing. So maybe the McCanns were just under the impression this was a very safe place as well. I don't know for sure, but obviously they made a mistake. Now what happened is, and I'll go into a more detailed timeline here in a minute, and I'd say most people listening to this are familiar with what happened, but for anyone that's not, on the night of May the 3rd, Kate and Jerry were at the tapas restaurant with their friends, and again, every 20-30 minutes, someone's going to check on them. About 10 p.m., Kate goes to check on the kids and finds that Maddy is missing, right?
Okay.
And, then, they start looking for her and they're unable to find her. But that's the gist of what happens. And it escalates. It turns into a huge missing persons case. Maddy's never found. It's a media circus, basically.
You
right?
said they started looking for her. Do you know when they called the cops?
Yeah, well, let me get into the whole timeline of it, and we'll discuss exactly the time frame for all those things right now. So on the day of May 3rd, the McCanns are out, enjoying their day in Praia Da Luz. I don't know what all they were doing, probably go to the beach, stuff like that. But they arrive back at their apartment sometime between 5 and 6 p.m. And at that time, they start, feeding the kids dinner and sort of get them calmed down so they'll be ready to get in bed. Now, Jerry at that time leaves to go play a game of tennis. And he comes back about 7 p.m. At that point, Kate's pretty much got the kids ready for bed. So they get them laid down, read them a bedtime story. And by 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry are meeting their friends at the tapas restaurant. Now, about 9, Jerry goes to check on the kids. And he does say that he notices the door is slightly more ajar than they left it. They left it just almost closed with just a little bit of the door open.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was out about like a 45-degree angle. He thought that was strange. But he looks in on the kids. They're all there. They're all fine. And he pulls the door shut. So it's just another, it's just a little crack. Okay. Now, at 9:15 p.m., their friend Jane Tanner says that she noticed a man carrying a small child who was blonde and wearing pink pajamas in the direction away from that apartment complex. The child was barefoot, and the pajamas were, kind of similar to the ones that Madeleine was wearing.
Right.
Obviously, she didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But later on, she realizes that, when they talk about what Madeleine was wearing, that these were similar pajamas.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've read about this sighting on a couple of different occasions.
Yeah, a lot of times it's just called the Tanner sighting.
Yeah.
That was at 9:15. Now at 9:30 p.m., Kate was about to go check on the children, and Matthew Oldfield was going to go check on his children as well. So he tells Kate just to sit down and he'll look in on her kids as well. Now he goes in and he says the door is sort of ajar, and it's in his description, it is more ajar than what Jerry left it ajar, right?
Okay, so is the implication there that somebody had been in twice? Is that what they're thinking?
Honestly, I cannot say that. I think what they've thought is that maybe someone had already come into the apartment, and when Jerry came in to check on everything, maybe the person hid and then came back out after Jerry left.
Okay.
Possibly. But as I said, Matthew Oldfield says the door is, more ajar than Jerry said he left it. Now, at the time, he didn't think anything about that. This is all just things that they discuss later and realize that don't add up, right?
Okay.
Now, Matthew doesn't actually lay eyes on Maddy. He said that he just sort of glanced in where the doors open, and he could sort of see the bed that the twins were in. But, he didn't hear any children up, awake, or anything. He did hear a noise that sounded like one of them rolled over in their bed. So he thought everything was fine, and he left without actually opening the door and looking in.
That seems a little odd.
In retrospect, it does seem odd, and you think, oh man, why didn't you look in to see what was going on or see if all of them were there? But when you think about it, at the time, he's probably not thinking about something along the lines of an abduction, right? he's probably just thinking he's checking in to make sure the kids aren't awake and crying.
I mean, I can certainly understand his perspective. I mean, that's reasonable, but come on, it seems like you'd at least, lay eyes on all the children, particularly when you told the child's mother, "Hey, just sit tight, I'll check on them," right?
Yeah. No, I understand that, but in his mind, he's probably checking on to make sure they just weren't awake. And also, I would think that he's probably thinking, what if I do open the door and look in? I might wake them up and they're going to be scared and say, "Oh, why are you here? Where's my mom?" Right.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I guess I can understand that. Just this whole situation makes me very uncomfortable with the kids being there by themselves.
I agree. I agree. Now, Oldfield, he did get a lot of bad attention for this later. Like some people thought, oh, maybe he took Maddy, right?
Would he have even had time to do that, though?
It doesn't seem that he would have. No, I don't think so. And, of course, he got a lot of criticism, too, because he didn't lay eyes on him. But to him, I think this was just an honest mistake. There's obviously nothing nefarious behind that as far as I can tell. Right?
So with the current thinking, is the suggestion that Maddy was already gone and that she wouldn't have been there had he checked?
It's possible, or it is possible she was gone a bit later than that. It's hard to say. But with the fact that if he is correct, the door was more open, and Jerry was correct that he did pull the door shut, it seems that Maddy was probably already gone at that point.
Okay.
Now, let's move on to 10 p.m. Around 10, a family that was not there with the McCanns say they noticed a man carrying a small blonde child down the road toward the beach.
Was that the same sighting as the Tanner?
It seems to be a different sighting. We're not absolutely positive, but Jane Tanner seemed to think they were going a different direction, and obviously this was 45 minutes apart. Now, somebody may be mistaken on the time, and somebody might even be mistaken on exactly which way they were heading, because at the time, no one's thinking that there's been an abduction, right?
Right.
And I'd say a lot of these people hanging out at the Tapas restaurant have been drinking. So, they're probably not just being super aware of everything that's going on around them.
Yeah.
So we can't say exactly if these weren't the same sighting. They could have been, or these could be two separate sightings.
And memories from eyewitness sightings are, tend to be highly fungible anyway, so.
Yeah, especially when you're out having a relaxing night, having a few glasses of wine, I would imagine, too.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and details like that take on different contexts depending on whether the abduction had already happened or not.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, also at 10 p.m., Kate gets up and she's going to go check on the kids. Now, when she walks in to the apartment, she notices that the door is open too far. And she's walking up to it to go check on the kids, and she says that the door blows shut right before she reaches it. And which is really weird, right? How would that happen? So she opens the door, the window is open,
That makes
and
sense.
Maddy is not in her bed. And she flips out. She runs all around the apartment looking for Maddy. She looks to see if maybe she's in their bed, and in Kate and Jerry's bed. She's not in there. She's not in their bedroom. She opens all the cabinets, looks everywhere in the apartment, can't find them. And she's going crazy, can't find Maddy. She runs out and gets all of her husband and all of her friends from the restaurant and has them come start helping look for Maddy. Now they do inform the hotel and ask them to call the police. But they don't call them. It seems that the resort doesn't call the police immediately. I don't know if there was some miscommunication there, or maybe the resort just wanted to try to find Maddy. They thought she'd wandered off and they didn't want to get the police involved because they didn't want any, bad attention, bad press or anything.
I hope it's the miscommunication and they weren't worried about publicity, because
I agree. But finally they do go back to the hotel and say, "Why aren't the police here? Please call the police." And they do get the police. And the police show up around 11:10. And this is over an hour after Kate notices she's gone, right? And it's been over 2 hours since anyone's laid eyes on Madeleine at this point.
Right.
Now the police they have two different police forces in Portugal.
Mhm.
One is the GNR, which stands for Guarda Nacional Republicana, basically the Republican National Guard.
Okay.
The GNR is sort of just like they're like beat cops on the streets. They deal with small crime stuff like that. They arrest people, but they don't do major investigations, right? All the investigators are part of a police force called the Policia Judiciaria or Judiciara, excuse me, which we will call the PJ. But this is basically like the Portuguese FBI, and they handle all investigations. Now, the GNR really isn't equipped for this. I mean, they are equipped for looking for a child that's gone missing, but they're not equipped for anything like searching other people's apartments or questioning people or putting up roadblocks, right? That's the PJ's jurisdiction there.
Okay.
But after searching for a while, the GNR officers on site decide, well, we have to call in the PJ. This is over our heads. And the PJ arrives about 1 a.m. So at this point, you're 4 hours out from the last time Madeleine was seen. And, they come in and they're going to start investigating. But at this time, you have to understand the scene has not been preserved, right? People have been in and out of this apartment all night because you have the McCanns and all of their friends that are searching for Maddy. You have most of the resort staff searching for Maddy. You have a lot of other guests that have come to help searching for Maddy. And a lot of them are coming in the apartment saying, we looked here, we haven't found her. Where should we look now? In and out. Just probably, over 100 people in and out of this apartment since then. Just over and over.
So the crime scene has been anything but preserved.
It is. It's not preserved at all. And now, when the investigators arrive on scene, they do notice some things that don't really seem to make sense with the abduction, or at least according to the lead investigator at the time. He's a man named Goncalo Amaral.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he was actually removed from the case later on, and he did write a book about it. But he did some interviews on the Netflix documentary, and in that interview, he did say that when he arrived, that shutter was only open a few inches. And of course, Kate had described it as being open, while not possibly all the way, but open pretty far, right?
Do we know which one was correct?
We don't know for sure. He also says there was no sign of forced entry, which that seems reasonable to me, because if someone did come in the window, there's no reason they would have tried to get in the front door, tried to break in the front door. So that makes sense. Now,
was the window not locked?
We don't know for sure. I should address this, though. According to the resort, when their employees go in to clean the room during the day, a lot of times they would open those windows while they're in there cleaning, and sometimes they'd shut them again without locking them. So it's very possible this window could have been unlocked without the McCanns ever knowing it.
Right, yeah.
Right. Now, also, Amaral said that the blanket that Maddy slept with every night, that her parents said that, they thought that if she had gotten up and wandered off, she would have taken that blanket and her cuddle cat with her, but they were still in the bed. Amaral says that this blanket was still folded up neatly and laying at the head of the bed. And he also said the sheets had not been moved. The bed was still made. Now, this, though, I did see photos of this, and that's not the case. That blanket was not folded up. It was laying on the bed, but it was obviously unfolded, sort of laying there in a pile. And the sheets were turned down like someone had gotten out of the bed. Now, I don't know if
that had been properly preserved, though. Is it possible that they had been moved after he saw them, or was he definitely lying?
I don't know for sure. It's hard to say, because Amaral does. I mean, it's very obvious that he is not the biggest fan of Kate and Jerry, right?
Right.
And early on, he started to see them as suspects. So he could be lying. The things could have been moved around. It's really hard to say. But that's what he said in the interview, and I think it's important to note that here. Now, the McCanns felt like the PJ weren't doing enough. They weren't moving quickly enough. Now the PJ is checking surveillance footage. They're interviewing people around the resort, around the town, asking if they'd seen anything. But they never did set up any roadblocks, right? They didn't.
Would that have mattered though, given the time frame?
It's really hard to say. See, the Amaral actually said that, when he got on the scene, it had been 4 hours since anyone seen Maddy, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, what would a roadblock have done at that point?
I really don't know. I mean, at the time, or rather in that location, you could probably, I think you could be in Spain in an hour and a half from then.
Oh,
so you're in another
wow.
country in an hour and a half. Within like 8 hours, you could be in Africa. You could be in Morocco.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what a roadblock would have done at that time, but Kate and Jerry felt like there should have been roadblocks.
I mean, it's understandable. They're parents of a missing child. I mean, they're going to want to see things happening.
Right. And, to be completely honest with you, I don't disagree. They probably should have set up roadblocks just in case, right? Because maybe someone has taken Maddy somewhere close. They're going to try to move her. It wouldn't have hurt to set up the roadblocks, right?
Right. And maybe they got spooked when everybody was looking for the kid and just were trying to lay low for a while.
Yeah, right. But another really big problem here is that at that time, Portugal did not have a sex offender registry.
Well, that's unfortunate. So, I mean, they didn't really know where to start then, looking for somebody that might harm a child, right?
Exactly. But because in the U.S., and I imagine in most countries around the world, when a child goes missing, the first thing you do is go to the sex offender registry, go around to every one of these people, see if they have an alibi, see if they're acting suspicious, check all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they couldn't do that. So there's another big problem. And, the McCanns feel like this is just moving too slowly. They feel like the PJ's not doing enough to try to find Maddy. They feel like they're not, putting their full effort into it. So they get with the media and they go to the BBC and, they try to get some media attention on this. And it works. This turns into a media frenzy, and stations and newspapers all over Europe pick this up. And, at the time, according to the BBC, the British newspapers could sell 30,000 extra copies per issue just by putting a picture of Maddy on the front cover.
Dear Lord. Well, that's an incentive.
Yeah, that's how big this was, And it ended up, it got a lot more people involved in the investigation. UK authorities got involved, and obviously there's a lot more pressure on the Portuguese authorities to do more and to be appearing to do more, right?
Right, but it seems like there'd also be a heavy downside to that. I mean, if the presence of a story about Maddy is causing that much extra sales, it seems like they'd just be incentivized to print whatever BS that they hear about rather than substantiating things. Seems like it's just a recipe for misinformation.
Well, and that did happen, honestly. That there was a lot of misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. And anytime the media got wind of anything, it was in the papers immediately. So you did have a lot of stuff happening with this. Also, it kind of backfired on the McCanns as well, because at that point they couldn't do anything without just paparazzi following them anywhere they went.
Right.
So you have some issues with it as well. Now, DNA samples weren't even collected until after that apartment had been cleaned and rented to other people. So I have no idea why that's the case.
So do you think that was more of a mistake by the police, or could that have just been a resource issue?
It's got to be a mistake. I don't know why it would be a resource issue. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, probably early on, obviously very early on, they thought that Maddy had just wandered off somewhere. They're going to find her, right?
Right, yeah.
But, after a few hours, you'd think they'd start collecting these samples. And another big problem is that scent dogs had been brought in very early on trying to get Maddy sent to track her somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't able to track her, but these dogs have been all over the apartment as well, sniffing everything. So that's also, a problem for any kind of DNA evidence.
Yeah.
And with all the people that have been in there, it's a nightmare for DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cadaver dogs and blood dogs weren't even brought into the apartment either until it would have been over a month after the disappearance before that ever happened.
Wait, well, what dogs were the... Oh, okay, so those were just the dogs that came in to get her sent for the search, right? They were just search dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were just trying to get her sent to try to track her.
All right, that threw me off just for a second.
Yeah. And, these are just all, I guess you could say, blunders, right? And you have animosity already between the Portuguese authorities and the McCanns. Actually, when Amaral interviewed in the Netflix documentary, he openly criticized the McCanns for going on television. He said that, going on TV and trying to get media attention on this puts pressure on the abductors and makes them, maybe they're going to do something stupid because they know you're after them.
Like they wouldn't know that police are already after them?
Exactly right. He also said that it was unwise for them to discuss Maddy's eye condition and how it's a very unique appearance. He said, well, that's basically a death mark because if you say that on TV and then they realize that, her eye looks like this and it's so unique, they'll know they can't pass her off as someone else and they'll have to kill her. But
that makes no sense. First of all, anybody who's ever seen a picture of Maddy, it's very prominent, that feature. There's no way they could have missed it.
No, it obviously, as soon as you kidnap her, as soon as you look at the child, you're going to see that. This is a very distinctive mark. It's not like they're going to be watching the news and say that and say, what? Come here, let me see your eye.
Right, yeah.
No, that
That's
didn't happen.
ludicrous.
But as you can see, it's not going well already.
Yeah, and I'm sure the McCanns aren't very happy that they're considered suspects, even though, honestly, that's probably kind of reasonable.
Right. Well, they were not actually named suspects right off the bat.
Well, I wasn't talking about necessarily formally. I just meant that the police were probably suspecting them, at least in some capacity. I mean, you have to at least exclude them somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. You have to because, well, obviously, the first place you're going to look is the parents. They're the closest people to the situation, and you have to look at them, right?
Yeah.
But the first named suspect in the case was a man named Robert Murat.
How long was this after the disappearance?
This was just a few weeks after the disappearance, just a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Now, Murat was a British expat that was living with his mother in Praia Da Luz. And he actually lived very close to where the McCanns were staying.
All right.
And once Maddy disappeared and there was a big investigation going on, Murat showed up and offered to work as a translator for the police because he was fluent in both English and Portuguese. Now, he became a suspect because reporters went to police and said that he was asking them a lot of suspicious questions about the case.
So they thought he was trying to inject himself into the investigation?
Yeah,
Okay.
which that happens, right?
Yeah, it's pretty common.
It's very common. So police actually raided his home. They went through everything, his computer, his hard drives, telephone records. They dug up his mom's yard looking for evidence. And they did not find much.
I mean, that seems like pretty thin evidence to go that far.
It does, right? They did find a connection to a man named Sergei Malinka. And what had happened is apparently Murat had made a call to Malinka at about the time Madeleine went missing. Now, Malinka and Murat both say they don't even remember this phone call. They think that maybe he might have pocket dialed Malinka accidentally, because what was going on is Malinka was actually working for Murat. He was building a website for Murat's property business, and they really didn't even know each other other than that.
Okay.
But they were both harassed by the media after this. And, obviously they're already basically convicted by the newspapers. Everyone thinks they're guilty.
Well, so who was this other guy that having a connection to him would have even been a problem?
it doesn't make sense that having a connection was a problem. It's just the fact that he made a phone call to him about the time Madeleine went missing, right? That's really the only connection there.
That makes no sense whatsoever.
Right? And
I mean, I'm sure I've made plenty of phone calls around the time someone went missing.
Yeah, right. Well, it turns out, it shouldn't say it turns out, reports show up in the media that Malinka had been erasing hard drives and stuff like that right before this, but that's not true at all. Like, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. There's really no evidence against these two men at all, other than the fact that, Murat showed up and was translating, and he made a phone call to Malinka. That's the only evidence against these two people. And these were, major suspects for a while that, the police, made their lives hell. The media made it even worse. So they had a rough time of it.
That'll teach him to be a good Samaritan, huh?
Yeah. Well, we say good Samaritan. He was probably being pretty nosy, right?
Probably. But I mean, I'm sure he was still effective as a translator if he spoke both languages. I'm sure he was useful.
Being nosy is hardly a crime, right? I mean,
yeah,
you can't prosecute someone for a murder because of that. But obviously, these two guys were innocent. They're cleared eventually. But the next named suspects are the McCanns. And really the biggest piece of evidence here is the fact that a cadaver dog and a blood dog did hit in the McCanns' apartment.
That's troubling.
The cadaver dog hit in the parents' bedroom and behind the sofa, and then again out on the patio. It also hit on Madeleine's cuddle cat, but that wasn't actually in the apartment at the time. That was a different place where it hit on the cuddle cat. And the blood dog hit behind the sofa, in the same spot where the cadaver dog hit.
Also troubling.
Yes. And this was pretty much the only real piece of evidence against the McCanns. Now, you have some other pretty circumstantial evidence. One is the fact that it doesn't look good that they left their children alone that night. Right?
No, not at all.
Though they were doing this every night and their friends were doing it as well, right? And you also have the fact that some of the things that their friends said seemed very convenient for the McCanns. For instance, the Tanner sighting. It almost seems like that was created, to draw suspicion off of Kate and Jerry.
I mean, I can definitely see why someone would think that.
But I want to go and clarify that now, though, that was not the case because much farther down the line, authorities did track down the man that Jane Tanner saw.
How can they be certain it was the same person, though?
Well, when they tracked the guy down, he told them that, yes, he was walking through there at the time, carrying his daughter who was asleep. She'd been at the night crash.
Oh, okay.
And he actually was able to show them the pajamas she'd been wearing that pretty much fit the description that Jane Tanner made. So, obviously that sighting was not, constructed just to try to get them off, right?
Did they find out whether he was the same, whether he could have been the same person that the other couple saw? Were they able to establish that when they spoke to him?
No, it's possible that if they saw him walking a different direction, not toward the beach, but if that man was heading toward the beach, then it very likely was not the person that the Smiths saw.
Okay.
Now, another bit of evidence against the McCanns is that the cadaver dog and blood dog hit on the vehicle, their rental vehicle. And at first, it seems like it's very damning, but
it doesn't sound good.
The strange thing about this is that this was a rental vehicle they did not get until 24 days after Madeleine disappeared.
I mean, is it possible that they just didn't move her for 24 days because of the investigation that was going on? Is that something that could have happened?
Well, that was the police working theory on this. But I do have some reasons I don't think that was possible. For one, I cannot imagine where they would have hidden Madeleine's body that in this insane search where they looked in every nook and cranny around the resort, that no one would have found her for 24 days at least.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
But even more than that is, at this point, Kate and Jerry have so many reporters and camera crews following them around at every step. I don't see how they could have moved a body without being seen.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, at one point when Kate and Jerry are flying back to the UK, some paparazzi actually find out that they're about to fly out, and they buy all of the seats that are left on the airplane last minute.
You got to be kidding me.
No, I'm completely serious. And they go on the plane and are filming them and taking pictures of them the entire time. It actually comes to the point where the captain had to come back into the passenger area and tell them if they don't stop, he'll have them arrested when they land. So with this much attention, I don't feel like Kate and Jerry could have moved that body this late in the investigation, or this far out, almost a month out.
It
right?
definitely seems like it would have been difficult. Though I'd like to know why the cadaver dog was hitting there.
I agree. Now, what I will say though, I watched video of the cadaver dog smelling these vehicles. Now, they're in an underground parking garage, and there are several vehicles here. And the handler brings in the cadaver dog, and the cadaver dog basically goes by every car, sniffs every car, and doesn't hit on anything,
Including theirs?
Including theirs.
Okay.
At which point, the handler brings them back to the McCann's car. Now, the handler has said, and I don't want to sound like I'm accusing this handler, but I do want to bring this information out, though, just to be completely, so everyone will understand exactly what happened.
Right.
The handler says that he had no idea that this car was the McCann's. However, this car is the only one that had stickers all over it that said, "Find Maddy, call this number. Have you seen this girl?" Right?
Right. That
So it
would have been
seems
a reasonable inference.
Yeah, that's their car. But he keeps bringing the dog back to this car, and the dog smells the car right here where he points to, and the dog walks off. And then he says, "No, come back here, smell here." And he smells there, and he goes all around the car, and he brings the dog back 8 or 10 times before the dog finally hits on that car. And he hits on the door. Then he also hit on the keys to that car later on, and he did hit on a few pieces of clothing. It was a blouse and a pair of pants of Kate's, and he hit on a children's shirt. It looked like it was one of the twin shirts.
So was the car the only time where he brought the dog back and forth? Were the others like direct hits?
The others were direct hits.
That doesn't look
car
good for the
was the one who brought
McCanns.
back.
No. See, the thing about the him bringing the dog back, that does sound a little suspicious, but at the same time, I don't know nearly enough about how this works. I mean, did that violate his usual procedures?
I can't say that it did. I don't know. But I know that I've read so many articles and heard in podcasts that when that dog came in, it hit on the McCann's vehicle immediately. And that's not what happened. So it's important that we know that.
Okay.
That dog, he actually was brought back to that car several times.
But the other areas were instant hits, right?
Yeah, they were. They were instant hits. Now, I'm also going to say, a lot of people think that the Portuguese authorities had some kind of interest in, in the McCanns being implicated in this,
Right.
because, there was some animosity. But this handler, from everything I can understand, was not actually a member of the Portuguese authorities. He came in, I believe, from the UK just to use these dogs to search.
Yeah,
so
that
it
makes
doesn't seem
sense.
like he would have had a vested interest in this
Right.
either. Right.
Even if the police did, he would have been an independent third party. So
Exactly. Right. So I'm just trying to present all sides of this argument because, there are a lot of things to me that point away from McCann's in this situation, but I really get hung up on these cadaver dogs. Right.
yeah, I mean, it's difficult not to, right?
Yeah. Now, the blood dog actually hit on the car in the same spot by the driver's side door, and the blood dog also hit in the trunk area.
Interesting.
Now, I am not sure exactly what would have caused, a cadaver dog to hit, let's say, if Maddy's body had not been there. I've read a lot of articles about, cadaver dogs and how accurate they are and things like that.
Research seems to suggest they are extremely accurate.
Yeah, you have like obviously the dog can't say this was a certain person's corpse, right?
Right. They
They can just
just have the
say,
smell.
yeah, they smell the smell of a dead body. Now, there is a lot of different information about how long a body needs to be dead before it's decomposing to the point that a cadaver dog will smell it.
Do we have
Um,
a decent range on that?
I wouldn't say it's a decent range because I've looked up a lot of articles on this, and many articles say that a body would need to be dead for about 24 hours before the dog can detect the scent. But others say it could be as little as 2.5 to 3 hours.
I mean, do we know about how quickly decomposition starts after death? I mean, I guess it would almost have to be immediately in some form, but
Yeah,
until it's noticeable at least.
well, to the human nose, it would be much, much longer than that.
Right, of course.
But as I said, I did find, more than one study that said 2.5 to 3 hours, the dog should be able to start detecting it. And in
Okay.
some cases, they would say it was longer depending on the situations, right? But let's
So
say
it
it
was
is,
well within the timeline that that the dogs could have picked it up then.
well, let's look at that timeline as far as the two and
Okay.
a half hours go, right? So the McCanns were out that day, right? And they didn't get back. It was at the earliest when they got back to their apartment was 5, right? And at 8:30, Kate and Jerry were at the Tapas restaurant meeting their friends.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say Maddie's body would have had to have been there dead for 2.5 hours. If she died right at 5 o'clock, that would put, she'd have to have been laying there until 7:30 when her body had started to decompose to the point that it would be detectable by the dogs.
Right.
At which point that gives them 1 hour to dispose of that body somewhere before they go to the restaurant.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Like, I get where you're going with this, but is it now again? I don't know how this works. Is it possible that had they handled the corpse, that other things they would have touched would be detectable by the dog?
It doesn't seem that way to me.
It does seem like a bit of a stretch, I'll admit, because I mean we're talking about an odor here.
Right. Now, I've looked to see if perhaps like blood or, maybe fingernail clippings, a cadaver dog could hit on that. But it doesn't seem to be the case unless, the blood, maybe like blood that had started to decompose in the body would smell that way, as far as I can tell. I can't find any really good information on that, though. One interesting fact that I did find was that 2 of the byproducts of decomposition that they use to train these dogs, they bottle them for AIDS, are called putrescine and cadaverine.
Mm-hmm.
And these 2 substances are also present in human saliva.
Really?
Yes.
In amounts detectable enough for dogs to hit on it?
It seems to be, yes. Now, that's what's strange to me, though, because
Wouldn't that mean they would hit just about all the time?
it does, doesn't it? But something that I've thought about as far as this goes, and this is just a theory on my part. I've not found anything to support this. But let's talk about Maddie's cuddle cat that she loves so much, right?
Okay.
That she kept with her all the time, right? Let's say a dog can't hit on saliva, or perhaps saliva that has aged for a while if there's a good amount of it.
Mhm.
I know with toddlers, they tend to get saliva on everything, right?
Yeah, no question.
So a toy that she's carrying around constantly and sleeping with is bound to have a good
She
amount
just
of her
slobbered all
saliva
over it,
on it.
no question.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if that couldn't have caused those hits. Because if you'll remember, the dog hit on that toy pretty much immediately. Like the dog actually, I saw a video of it, and it was in the apartment they were staying at later on. That toy, they'd put it into a cabinet, and the dog hit on that cabinet. They opened the cabinet, it got the toy out, right?
And you did, through research, get some sort of verification that dogs can hit on saliva?
No, I do not have verification of this.
So we don't know.
I just have verification of 2 of the major substances that they train these dogs with to scent out are in human saliva.
Okay.
But it was listed in multiple articles, but it never explained that if that could cause a dog to hit on it. So that's just something that was a bit of a stopping point for me, because that toy is something that the dogs did hit on. And if you've ever seen, video of Kate McCann walking around, after Maddie's death, just anywhere she's going, there's always paparazzi around. She's always carrying that cuddle cat with her.
Right. Yeah.
So if that cuddle cat did have some kind of scent like that, now, even if it was corpse scent, right? Or whether it was the scent of the saliva, I don't know. If it was corpse scent, it would make sense as to why Kate's clothes may have smelled that way. The keys may have smelled, the dog may have hit on the keys, or even that rental car because of that cuddle cat, if it did have the scent of decomposition on it. But that's as far as I can get with that. I don't know. There was a DNA sample taken from the car, though.
Okay.
Now, this is that rental car from 24 days later, right? And the PJ actually tells authorities when they get the DNA results back that it is 80% a match for Maddy's DNA. And they say that they're sure upon further analysis, it will be 100% match. Now, this also seems like that's a smoking gun, right? If Maddy's DNA is in the trunk of that car.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of questions I would have, having looked into DNA evidence quite a bit. I'm not as quick to jump to conclusions on these, but...
Well, let's talk about that DNA evidence.
How large was the sample? Was it from a single donor? I mean, these are important questions.
It was a partial sample, and they're using an LCN DNA test, right?
Which is a less discriminating test, right?
Yes.
I looked at that one, actually. It's when there's that's specifically for when there's a small or a particularly small sample, right?
Yeah, it's called low count, right?
Yeah, I had to read through all this for doing another case at one point, so.
Yeah. So, there's that. It's not as accurate of a test.
It's not like an STR test or something like that.
And they do get several markers that match. But the problem with this is, and the PJ actually have to retract their statement later on, because it turns out this sample they're testing is a composite of at least 3 people's DNA.
I mean, the fact is that, and there's a lot of research on this, composite samples are one of the hardest things to make any sense of when it comes to DNA analysis. They're almost forensically useless.
Well, not just that. Let's look at the people that have been in this car, right? You have both of Madeleine's parents in this car and 2 full siblings, right?
Yeah.
So I would imagine a composite of these people's DNA basically would match any markers in Madeleine's DNA, right? I mean, if it was a composite of her 2 parents, you could could match every marker.
Would be a match with her.
I'm saying if it's a composite of both parents, though.
Yeah.
It could be, you could match 100% of the markers in that, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Let's also discuss the fact that there are 2-year-olds in this car that are full siblings of hers. And if there's one thing I know about 2-year-olds, they get their DNA everywhere. There's saliva everywhere. You could be changing diapers in the car. They vomit. There's everything going on constantly that could get their DNA in that car. So that DNA sample is pretty much useless. So,
and you said it was a really small sample?
Yeah, it was a partial sample, and it was a composite of 3 different persons.
Yeah, that's almost forensically useless.
So, that's basically a rundown of the evidence against the McCanns.
I mean, I'll be honest, even with the DNA sample, the dog's hitting, that's hard to get over.
I agree with you.
Like, even if the timeline doesn't seem to make perfect sense, like that's a lot of hits on some very interesting places, very suspicious places.
I agree with that, but I cannot figure out with the timeline how it would have added up.
So let's say it's a scenario where the parents did it. Is it possible that she actually died considerably earlier than when they said she went missing? Could going out to eat have just been a ruse of them trying to cover up what happened to their daughter? And I'm not even saying in this instance they would have done it maliciously. Like, it could have been an accident or something, and they just didn't want to get in trouble. Maybe they panicked.
Well, let's look at it, right? Like we said, the McCanns were out that day, and people had seen Madeleine while they were out. And they didn't go back to the apartment until at the earliest 5 p.m. So Madeleine could not have died before 5 p.m.
Okay.
And like I said, if a body has to be decomposing for 2.5 hours before a dog can detect that scent,
Right.
that means the body would have had to been in that apartment for 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that means she would have had to, if she had died right at 5 o'clock, her body would have been there until 7:30. And then they would have had to have disposed of it before 8:30, excuse me, when they met at the restaurant. And then you have the fact that they're just acting normal and having fun at the restaurant with their friends, having drinks.
Yeah, I'll admit that the timeline that's thin, right? It seems like it'd be very difficult to do everything they would need to in that time.
Right.
Now, as far as their behavior, I mean, a lot of people seem to suspect that the other people are in on it. So all we know about their behavior is from their friends, right? So that's not as important to me.
Well, not necessarily. Actually, they talked to some other people. Jerry especially talked to other people at the tapas restaurant that said he was acting, normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other people that were not there with them. Now, I can't say these people aren't people that he had made friends with during the vacation, but someone you meet on a vacation.
Unlikely to help you cover up the death of a child.
Right, exactly. But let's also talk about, would the McCanns cover up something like this? And
Weren't
why
they both
would they?
doctors too?
They were. They are both physicians. And if you'll remember, they had a lot of trouble having Maddy, and they found Maddy to be a real blessing when they had her. They, according to friends and family, they very much loved and adored Maddy.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, I don't think they would have killed her on purpose.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much right out. Right. They just no history of violence in the family. It seems inconceivable that they would suddenly intentionally murder their kid.
Yeah, but also, I mean, would they cover something up? What would they cover up? Right. I've heard some people put forth a theory that, maybe they were sedating their children to keep them asleep, so they could go out. But if that is
probably
the case,
most common theory I've looked at too.
Right,
what little research I've done into the case, that is.
Well, let's say they were sedating them, right? Let's go with that theory.
Okay.
The McCanns are both doctors. They're both medical doctors, okay? Mm-hmm. For one, I don't think they would sedate their children with anything that's dangerous, right? I mean, they would know the risks of anything. They're not going to give them something that would kill them accidentally, right?
I mean, that seems reasonable.
And also, if they did, would they cover that up? I feel like with them being doctors, if they feel like Maddy is acting strangely after they give her this, they would immediately
recognize the symptoms.
Yeah, they would see the symptoms. They would immediately, contact help and get help. But let's say they didn't notice the symptoms and Maddy just died. Would they even try to cover it up? I mean, obviously,
it's a good question. Like, it doesn't seem so.
I mean, you could just say she got into my Valium. She's done this before. I didn't realize it. We've had this tragic accident, right? So I don't see any reason to cover it up. Maybe if there was some kind of accident in the apartment that caused her to die, like she fell and something happened. Obviously that's an accident. Why would they cover it up? I don't think they were beating the child. There was no evidence of that,
Yeah, that seems highly unlikely.
So, I don't think they would have done something to her that would have just, killed her. They would have, physically, they would have killed her. I can't see any scenario they're covering something up.
I'll admit, as bad as the cadaver dog and the blood dog hit sound, thinking about it is difficult to come up with a scenario where two licensed medical professionals would have let the kid die without calling police or emergency services.
Right.
Like, it is really difficult because I think we can both agree we can rule out intentional. They didn't intentionally kill their kid.
Right. And you also have the accusations that the Tapas 7 are covering for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can see someone's friends covering up something for them, I guess. But for one,
would you tell 7 people? Even if
7 people, right? I mean, Do you have 7 people you think would cover for you if you were covering up a murder or a death?
No.
I mean,
Maybe 3?
even if you trusted these 7 people, one of them's going to say something, right? I mean, you can't do that. And the media accused them of having this pact of silence they made to cover for their friends. But really, I think that's more a matter of the fact that because of, local law, they're not supposed to talk about the case.
So, just to be clear, when you say the media, are you talking about like tabloids, or was this actual like a legitimate media?
Oh no, this is legitimate media.
Okay.
Has said things about this, obviously. Yeah, like real media, right, has said, they have a pact of silence.
Well,
it seems
whatever
like
real media even means these days. Let's be
exactly
honest.
right. Yeah, but I mean, obviously, when a newspaper sunk 30,000 extra copies for having an article about Madeleine McCann, they're going to have to put something in it.
Yeah.
Right. So they say pact of silence, but that just seems preposterous to me. I don't see 7 people staying silent about something for 14 years.
It is difficult to believe, yes. I mean,
So,
it seems like one of them, even if they would have told 7 people, which seems unlikely, it seems like because they were all questioned by police, I assume, right?
yes, yeah.
I mean, one of them would have said something.
I would think so. But, all these reasons I'm giving you here, they're just reasons that make me doubt the McCanns were guilty. But because of those dog hits, I can't say I can rule that out, right?
I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I've never known much about the case. I've only looked up. I've read some articles here and there. My assumption was always very similar to what with JonBenet, that one of them did something and they were covering it up. But it doesn't seem like there's nearly as much evidence against them as at least I was led to believe there was.
Right. Well, again, the media was very critical of them for a long time. There was an opinion that, a lot of the footage people got of them, they felt like they weren't showing enough emotion. But
again, you can't tell people how they're supposed to respond to their kid being missing.
No. And when you're spending so much time, looking for your child, going through all the stuff they're going through, you're going to just appear drained most of the time, I think.
Right.
And I think that could appear as emotionless as well.
Did they do anything weird, like say the Ramseys did, like hire a PR firm? Like, did they do anything out of the ordinary for somebody who had a child missing?
No, they did hire private investigators to look into the case, but they didn't.
Well, that's not out of the ordinary, though. Just about every parent of a missing child does that.
Yeah. No, they did have some people working with them that would like make statements and stuff, but it wasn't really. It was just friends of theirs. Like they try to get away, and then the people would say, "Oh, they are leaving the country now," because they didn't.
Okay, so they didn't but they didn't hire like a law firm with the sole purpose of feeding stories to the media.
No, they didn't. And let's not forget they were constantly going back to Portugal, looking for Maddy, trying to find answers. Cooperating with police constantly. They didn't seem to be acting like people that were trying to cover something up. And let's not forget.
Why would you go back? Like after you were able to leave, if you were guilty, why go back?
Well, let's not forget too that they're the ones that got the media involved so heavily to begin with.
Right.
So if you are covering something up, why would you want the media involved to bring more attention to it?
See, that's another thing that is in sharp contrast to how the Ramseys behaved, right? They didn't want media attention. Unless it was completely on their terms.
Mm-hmm. And another case that we covered where something similar was the Dior Kuntz case. Now, we don't know that Dior's parents...
they still declined several different interviews on, major network television. So it's strange.
And, there, especially at the beginning, the McCanns were just jumping at the opportunity to get on, national or, international television to bring attention to this.
Yeah, that's completely different than the behavior of some of the other parents that I've suspected.
But like I said, I can't completely rule it out. The cadaver dog does make me wonder, right?
Yeah, no question.
But I will say that to me, the biggest evidence that the McCanns were not guilty is the fact that there's a new suspect, and the amount of evidence that I've seen against him really makes my attention swing toward him and away from the McCanns.
I've seen some articles, but I don't even know what the guy's name is. So
Well, let's talk about him now. His name is Christian Bruckner. And lately, in the last, year and a half, it seems that public opinion is really shifting away from Kate and Jerry and shifting toward Bruckner as the most likely suspect for this.
Is the evidence pretty convincing, at least what we have?
Yeah, we'll get into it. But I will say, though, multiple investigators have said that Bruckner is the strongest lead this case has ever had. There's a German prosecutor named Hans Christian Wolter.
Mm-hmm.
He's handling this case. And in an interview with 60 Minutes, he said, quote, "We have strong evidence that Madeleine McCann is dead and that our suspect killed her." And then in another quote with the same interview, 60 Minutes, "We have enough evidence to say that our suspect killed Madeleine McCann." Right.
I mean, it's interesting. To be fair, I don't exactly know how Germany's justice system works, to be clear, but being from America, I'm highly skeptical of any comments coming from prosecutors.
I understand that.
I take them with a grain of salt. I'm not accusing prosecutors of lying, universally, but I have my doubts anytime they speak.
I will say, as far as Germany goes, they have some very strange laws about what their prosecutors can and can't say. He's not actually able to say the man's name. He would call him Christian B. He couldn't say his last name.
That's weird.
And also, there's just a lot of details that they can't give out, according to German law. But let's go into what we do know about Bruckner. Bruckner was convicted of child abuse in Germany. And he left Germany before he could serve his sentence. He moved to Portugal to get away from that. And that's in 1995.
Okay.
All right. Now, Bruckner was living just over a kilometer away from the apartments that the McCanns were renting, where Madeleine went missing. 2 years before Maddy's disappearance, Bruckner raped a 72-year-old woman just minutes away from that apartment.
Did you say 72?
Yeah, 72-year-old woman. Yes.
Oh.
He also beat her very severely. He tied her up, and over a period of several hours, he raped her and beat her with a metal rod. It was very brutal.
So this is clearly a very sick man.
Very sick man. Again, convicted child molester as well.
Right, yeah.
Now, in 2006 in Portugal, he was arrested for theft. And when he was arrested, he refused to give them the address of his residence in Portugal. He just told them, he didn't have a home, right? Obviously, he was lying to them. And he actually called a German friend of his from the prison to have him go out to his house and get rid of all his computers and hard drives, flash drives, everything like that.
I'm assuming he had some sort of child pornography or something on there, or something incriminating.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit about where they found a bunch of this stuff. But yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Now, according to another friend of Bruckner's, he had talked several times about wanting to build a dungeon underneath his house in Praia Da Luz.
Excuse me?
Yeah, he actually based it on the Josef Fritzl case. I don't know how familiar you are with that case, but I know I've mentioned it to you before.
Yeah, I know you've talked about it a couple times, but I know very little about it.
Well, Fritzl was an Austrian that built a dungeon underneath his house and trapped his teenage daughter in it and kept her there for years and actually fathered several children with her.
Right,
and,
I remember that story now.
Yeah,
that's
completely unbeknownst to his wife that lived upstairs. His daughter was in his dungeon
really
downstairs.
weird.
Yeah, it was really weird. But I don't want to get off topic there. But he had actually mentioned specifically Josef Fritzl when talking about this dungeon he wanted to build.
So did his friend not think this was weird?
Well, yeah, he did think it was weird, but he didn't report it until after Madeleine McCann went missing and people are talking about it all over the media, right?
I mean, I don't really know how I'd respond to that if my friend told me he wanted to build a murder dungeon.
Well, he didn't say murder dungeon.
He hasn't technically done anything yet, so
yeah,
it seems like it'd be difficult to call the police, but at the same time,
well,
it's a murder dungeon, which seems kind of weird.
I agree, right? But I would say a lot of these people knew that Bruckner was into some strange stuff anyway, if they were his friends, right? But I don't know. I don't want to speculate on why his friends didn't say anything or what his friends were into, right? He may have had something on his friends. You don't know, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, also according to Walters, Bruckner's phone made a call just outside of the Ocean Club during the window of time in which Maddy was thought to be abducted.
So they can tie him to the crime scene, or at least the general vicinity?
Yes, they can.
That's interesting.
There were multiple sightings of someone acting suspicious around the Ocean Club in the days before Maddy's abduction.
They fit his description anyway?
They do fit his description. As a matter of fact, there were e-fits made from these descriptions, and then there were actually, when those went on TV several years later, people were calling in, giving tips on Bruckner based on those e-fits.
But what's an e-fit?
Well, an e-fit is, sorry, I should describe that. It's sort of like a composite drawing that someone does, but it's done electronically, where they just take different pieces, like a nose that looks like this. They say this is the nose, and they put it on the face, right? But that's what an e-fit is.
Okay. So it's just like an electronic composite.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Now, one of these sightings actually describes a blonde man with a camper van that was acting suspicious very close to the McCann's apartment.
Does he have a camper van?
Yes, he drove a VW camper van that matched that description.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty damning.
Yes. Now, another friend of Bruckner's later tipped off authorities that Bruckner had drunkenly admitted that he knew what happened to Maddy.
Oh. So, I mean, now we have a direct tie.
Yes, we do.
Do we know when this was? Was it close in time to when Maddy went missing? Was it years later? Or?
This, as far as I know, this was years later when he admitted this drunkenly. Yeah, to his friends. I don't know what it was. I just know he was supposed to have been drunk and did admit that. And that friend did call in and tip off authorities as well. Now, the day after Maddy's disappearance, Bruckner deregistered a car that he had there in Portugal. And just a few days after that, he left Portugal and went back to Germany after he'd been living in Portugal for 10 years to stay away from Germany.
So something happened that made him go back to the country where he was, what was it he was wanted for? Or was it about
child molestation.
Yeah.
Just a few days after Maddy disappeared.
I mean, you have to wonder what makes somebody go back to a place where they're wanted for child molestation all of a sudden.
Yes. Now, we now know that Bruckner committed at least 20 burglaries around Praia Da Luz. He almost always targeted houses or apartments that were on the first floor that had a window that was easy to get into.
Now, he may have known about the practice of the staff at that. What was that place called?
The Ocean Club.
He may have known about their tendency to leave the windows unlocked too.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a theory among several people that he was probably tipped off that the McCanns were leaving their children in their rooms as well. For one, when the McCanns made their reservations, or when the group made their reservations, they actually told the people at the tapas restaurant that they wanted to have a table that was as close as possible to their rooms because they were leaving their children in their rooms.
But who would have tipped him off, though?
Well, possibly someone that was working at that restaurant. That's just a theory that people are passing around. I can't say there's any proof of that.
Is the notion that they did it intentionally or just like through conversation he got it out of them? I mean, do they think he had an accomplice? That's what I'm asking about.
They think there was an accomplice. Now, the accomplice may have just been hanging around and overheard that. But they assume that phone call that he made right around that time was an accomplice tipping him off that they were at the restaurant. Now, again, I don't have any proof of this, but that is a working theory that a lot of people are talking about.
I mean, I suppose it's feasible, though. I mean, but just like with the last guy, I'm skeptical of drawing any conclusions from just a phone call, at a suspicious time, right?
Yeah, I understand
that. Combined with everything else, yeah, it looks pretty bad for this guy.
Right. Well, and we can't say that was the case. I mean, for all we know, he did commit burglaries. He could have just been trying to burglarize this place and found a child in there, right? And with him being a rapist, we don't know. Now, we mentioned that rape of the 72-year-old woman in Praia Da Luz. I should also mention that in that case, he did go in through a first floor window and when he committed that rape. Also in 2004, an Irish woman named Hazel Behan, I'm really not sure how that's pronounced. She was raped in her first floor apartment near Praia Da Luz by a suspect that she now believes to be Bruckner now that she's seen his photo. And in that case, he entered through a first floor window.
So this could have been a pattern of his.
Yeah, it does seem to be a pattern, yeah.
Did she have a rape kit or anything done at the time?
I honestly do not know. I don't know. I do know that she has said she believes it was Bruckner now that she's seen the photo, but I don't have any information about, the DNA or anything like that.
I was just curious if they had any way to conclusively tell.
Yeah, I'd like to know as well, but I think it's probably part of that ongoing investigation, so we can't really know about it right now.
Yeah.
Now, in 2018, he was extradited to Germany from Italy on some drug charges. And then he was also, once he was in Germany, was convicted of raping that 72-year-old woman. And at that point, they're starting to connect the dots on Bruckner. And they're starting to think, he's probably involved with Madeleine McCann's disappearance because the German authorities have put together a lot of pieces of information about him, about his habits and things he's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
That seem to fit this. Now, going through his computer, authorities found some conversations he had in pedophilia chat rooms about fantasies that he had of taking a young girl and raping and killing her. And he was, very specific in things he said in that chat room about how he would just take this girl and use her for days and days. And it was very sickening.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
Did he have any seemingly unhealthy interest in the Madeleine McCann case? Any searches?
That not according to anything I know of right now, but there is a lot of information that they haven't released. He did obviously had a very unhealthy, interest in young girls. I
think that's obvious.
Yeah, well, a girlfriend of his named Nure Ozigan, I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. I'm very sorry. She dated him for 3 months. She said that she left him because of his growing obsession with young Croatian girls that he took to swingers parties with him. She didn't elaborate on how young these Croatian girls were. She said that he had a kiosk near a local school and he sold things like candy and refreshments there. And he often sold to young school children. And she said that he started taking, very noticeable interest in these young schoolgirls that he was talking to and selling stuff to from that kiosk. So again,
I can understand why she was out.
Yeah. And again, unhealthy obsession with these young girls. You don't know what he could have been planning with these schoolgirls,
And he's selling candy at a kiosk. I mean, that kind of screams pedo.
Yeah, but let's continue. As I said, authorities were looking into him, and they found out that he owned an abandoned factory, and they go and search this abandoned factory, and they found his dead dog buried there, and buried with that dead dog is a plastic bag filled with hard drives and flash drives.
Do we know what was on that shit?
We know it's filled with videos and pictures of child pornography and sex crimes that he committed. We don't know specifically if there are any pictures or videos of Maddy in that, though the way that the prosecutor talked, the prosecutor actually said in the 60 Minutes interview that he was not allowed to say whether there were or were not pictures of Madeleine McCann found on those hard drives.
Huh.
I don't feel like he would have made that statement if there weren't pictures of Maddy on the hard drives.
That seems reasonable.
Right.
Unless he's also allowed from definitively saying no. Right. It could just be the case that he has to say something neutral.
That's possible.
But it could
Um,
also mean that there are pictures of Maddy there. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. Now, also on that property was a camper that he owned. It wasn't the VW camper van. It was actually a full-size camper. And inside of that camper, they found little girls' swimsuits,
Oh,
which
were they able
is
to match them to any?
disturbing. Not that I know of, but then again, with this being an ongoing investigation, that's probably not something we'd have information on.
Yeah. So whether he killed Maddy or not, this guy's going away for a long time, right?
Yeah, definitely. He's currently serving time for that rape and the drug charges, and it seems that they're preparing a case against him. I cannot find anything where charges have been, laid against him yet,
Mm-hmm.
though, I'm sure they're just trying to get their ducks in a row so they can do this properly.
I mean, the
right?
implication definitely seems to be that the charges are coming.
Right. Now, also, if you kind of infer from the prosecutor's statements of how they have evidence that makes them believe Maddy is dead, and they have evidence to the point they feel like they can say that Bruckner killed her, it seems to be there has to be some kind of evidence on those hard drives.
Yeah, and that's interesting because they specifically said evidence that she's dead and not
Yes.
that he abducted her.
Right, that she's dead.
That's interesting. That does seem like they have something that they just haven't shared yet.
Right. Just saying that means that there has to be some kind of evidence to show that she's dead, and it's probably pointing toward Bruckner. And the only thing I can think of, unless there's some kind of evidence that we don't have any clue about, is it's got to be something on those hard drives. But this, I mean, to me, like all this evidence that I just explained about Bruckner, it really seems to me it's hard to believe that he didn't do this.
I mean, what are the odds of a random, pedophile being in the exact area at that time?
Mm-hmm. Right. Also, you've got to think if there was a sex offender registry, like a European wide one where he was registered and they knew he lived there, right? They could have gone to him and checked, the next
Immediately.
day.
Though, would he have been on any sort of Portugal list, though?
Probably not at the time because there weren't even records of him being in Portugal. But let's just say, they were tracking that and knew they could have checked into him, right? But it's so hard to say, if they hadn't made this misstep or that misstep. A lot of criticism that the Portuguese authorities got over this is that they really got tunnel vision on people. Like at first it was on Murat, and then on the McCanns, right? And if they hadn't been so focused on trying to make a case against them, they could have been really investigating and trying to find out what happened, and they probably, missed out on a lot of information.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's kind of common with investigations. That happens. And when you're investigating a crime like that, you have to be very diligent not to get tunnel vision.
Right.
To form, let your preconceptions lead you instead of following the evidence.
Right. I mentioned earlier that Emerald was removed from the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he actually was removed because he criticized the UK authorities that were involved in the investigation. He accused them of only investigating the leads that McCann's wanted them to investigate.
Do you know if there was any truth to that at all?
Well, it seems to me that the McCanns wanted them to investigate all the leads that weren't them, right?
Right.
Because the Portuguese authorities were basically for ages just looking into the McCanns,
mm-hmm.
right? So of course he's going to disagree with them about that because he's tunnel visioning on the McCanns and they're looking at all these other leads. So that kind of statement really shows me, for one, what kind of attitude the lead investigator for the Portuguese authorities has about the McCanns. Mm-hmm. He's so sure at the time they're guilty. And then, they're not getting along with other investigative agencies that are working on this, especially because they're looking at other leads that aren't the McCanns.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously.
Now, I will say this, that given the evidence he was working with at the time, I can certainly understand why he would have suspected the McCanns.
I agree, but that's no excuse not to keep investigating, all leads.
Yeah.
Especially, with a missing toddler like that. early on, you've got to be looking everywhere and turning over every stone.
And I don't know much about the justice system in Portugal, but it seems like with that first suspect, where how little evidence they had, when they just how invasive they got, seems like they don't have a lot of protections, for civil rights there.
I'm hoping things have changed there now.
If you can dig up somebody's yard
Mm-hmm.
and get their phone records and that sort of thing, just because they asked some weird questions to a reporter,
Mm-hmm.
that's troubling.
Well, you know what? There is one thing I did not mention. Actually, you remember the Tanner sighting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jane Tanner actually did say she thought that could have been Murat that she saw. They did a strange little test. So Tanner and a couple of members of the JP
Mm-hmm.
sat in a van and they waited for Murat to walk across the road. And they said, "Do you think that might be him?" And she said, "Yeah, I think it might be him." And that was
That's
another
a
piece of
little
their
weird.
evidence. It's weird and it seems really weak to me.
But
Obviously,
that honestly, that is much better, because that's not that different from like a traditional police lineup, and just getting identified in a police lineup gives the authorities gives the police all manners of authority to investigate you. So that makes a little more sense to me, actually.
but it's not a lineup though, right? It's not a lineup because they were specifically there to look at Murat, and
Yeah,
this is not.
that's true.
It's not remotely scientific. The fact that he's walking across the street, is he going to be walking the same way he was when he was carrying that child? You know, is he going to be walking the same way as he was when he was trying to not be noticed walking with his child as when he's just strolling across the street?
Yeah, you're right. I didn't really think that through. Though I will say that it's at least a little better, because at least they had somebody else saying that, at least they could tie him to a sighting at this point rather than just going on what he said to a journalist.
I guess so, but I feel like it was just them trying to find anything they could so that they could,
Oh, yeah, they were obviously reaching.
tear this guy's life apart and try to find evidence.
But given
right?
the scenario, I understand why they would have been desperate.
Well, obviously, yeah, there's a huge amount of media attention. There's pressure to, find out who did this, but I mean, it obviously wasn't him. And, they zeroed in on him with no evidence, and it took them a long time to clear him. A very long time.
So, was there anybody else considered? It seems to me that this Bruckner guy is an excellent suspect, but anybody else worth mentioning?
Not really. They had a few other people they looked into and sort of followed around, but there was never any evidence for them. Bruckner is really the Bruckner and the McCanns are really the only real suspects that were ever viable.
It seems like a stretch to me that there could be an innocent explanation for a pedophile that wanted a murder dungeon in his house just to happen to have been there. His presence is really suspicious.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, again, I can't completely rule out Kate and Jerry. I don't think they did it. Those cadaver dog hits, they really stick for me.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, they're troubling, no question.
There seems like there's just a mountain of at least circumstantial evidence against Bruckner, and it seems like they have something close to a smoking gun. Now, Walter said they didn't have any forensic evidence, but it's probably because they don't have a body.
Mm-hmm.
But, they've got something, or, they have to have something, or they wouldn't say they're fairly certain that Maddy's dead.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Though, again, you have to be very careful with, what prosecutors say, particularly when they're talking to the media. I'll take that much more seriously when they actually bring charges.
I will too, and I'm really hoping that happens because I'm excited to get answers and let's get some kind of justice here, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Because that doesn't always work out in the cases we look at.
Yeah. And
we're not going to get a happy ending with this one because, obviously it seems very likely Maddy is dead. But, next best thing is figuring out exactly who did it and giving the parents some closure.
There are some people that, will still argue that she may be alive.
That seems unlikely to me, but
Well, if you were to watch that Netflix documentary, they end it trying to say that there have been so many cases of, trafficking and abduction where the person has shown up alive at the end. They were found alive and okay at the
did
end.
any of them have such an apparent like bodily feature? I don't know what that eye condition was called, but it
No.
seems like to me that'd be hard to miss.
I completely
There would have been
agree.
some sighting of her if she were still alive.
I completely agree. And you also have the fact that these cases are really outliers. It-
Yeah.
It's just really uncommon for these kind of missing persons cases that last for so many years for those people to show up so alive.
Forget years. I mean, usually if a missing person's gone more than 72 hours, they're dead.
Yeah.
Much less years.
Right.
I mean, who was that? Elizabeth Smart? Isn't she the girl that she'd been been captured? I forget exactly how that went, but she was the one that was found years later, right?
Yes, she was. She'd been like in that guy's like shed, I believe it was. Out back.
That's extremely rare.
Yeah. No, it's so rare. But like I said, like some people still have hope. I'm not holding out, especially after the prosecutor saying that. It makes me think there's some kind of evidence she's dead. Don't know for sure. Yeah. Is Madeleine McCann still alive? I doubt it. In many cases of kidnapping and trafficking, it's certainly true that victims turn up many years later. But these cases are rare. For years, many people believed that Maddy's parents were guilty of at least covering up her death. I can't rule this out. However, in the last 2 years, the news of Christian Bruckner being named a suspect seems to have turned the tide of opinion. While she may not be alive, there is now new hope that we may soon have answers. Thank you for listening to Fact and Suspicion. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to suggest a case for us to cover, or if you have any feedback for us, we'd love for you to reach out to us through email at factandsuspicion@gmail.com or through Twitter @andsuspicion. Also, if you're listening to us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And we'd love for you to share these episodes with anyone you think may be interested.